The air bites. It's the winter of 1944 on the Western Front, and the cold has a way of getting into your bones, a deep, persistent ache that no amount of shifting in a muddy foxhole can shake. For a young German infantryman, hunched low under a slate-gray sky, warmth is a distant memory. His own rations are grim, a slice of black bread, hard as a rock, and the thin, bitter taste of ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns. His unit's field kitchen hasn't reached them in days. But today he has something different. A prize, a small wax-coated cardboard box, pried from the pack of an American soldier who won't need it anymore. A K-ration. He's heard stories about these, but holding one feels strange. It's light, compact. He fumbles with the packaging, his fingers numb. Inside, it's like a miniature treasure chest. Not the dense, joyless brick of hardtack he expected. No, this is a small, organized world of comforts. He sees a cellophane-wrapped packet of biscuits, a small tin of processed cheese, a compressed fruit bar, and 4 cigarettes. But what truly stops him are the little things. A flat stick of chewing gum, 2 foil-wrapped sugar tablets, and a small envelope of soluble coffee powder. Real coffee. He tears open the packet of coffee, pours the dark, fragrant powder into his canteen cup with melted snow, and stirs. The aroma alone is a shock. A ghost of a life before the war, of mornings in a warm kitchen. He takes a sip. It's rich, strong, and when he adds a sugar tablet, an almost forgotten sensation floods his senses. Sweetness. It's not the cloying, artificial taste he's used to, but a clean, pure sweetness that feels like a betrayal. He breaks off a piece of the fruit bar. It's chewy, packed with flavor. He hasn't tasted anything like this in months, maybe years. As the warmth spreads through him, a cold thought follows. This isn't a special occasion meal for the Americans. This is what their ordinary soldiers carry into battle. This is their standard issue. While he and his comrades subsist on rations designed for bare survival, the enemy carries small luxuries. He thinks of the German Eiserne portion, the iron ration canned meat and hard biscuits, to be eaten only in emergencies. His daily sustenance depends on a strained supply chain, on field kitchens and railheads that are prime targets for Allied bombers. The Americans, it seems, carry their abundance with them. The sheer industrial power required to produce and deliver this little box of calories and comfort is staggering. It's not just about food. It's about a system, a machine that can churn out millions of these packages. Each one with its own neatly printed menu, color-coded for breakfast, dinner, or supper. He'd heard of the breakfast units with their canned ham and eggs, the supper units with their tins of beef and pork loaf. He'd also heard whispers of the D-ration, a chocolate bar so dense with calories it was designed to taste just a little better than a boiled potato, to keep soldiers from eating it too quickly. Chocolate, sent by the millions to the front lines, alongside cigarettes and candy. This isn't just a meal. It's a weapon, a psychological one. How can you maintain the will to fight when the enemy eats better on the front line than your family does back home? The question isn't just about morale, it's about logistics. It's about a nation so rich, so untouched by the destruction of war, that it can afford to send its soldiers into a frozen forest with chewing gum and instant coffee. The young soldier finishes his coffee, the warmth a temporary shield against the creeping cold. He carefully folds the wrapper from the gum and slips it into his pocket, a strange, small souvenir. He isn't just wondering what the Americans eat anymore. He's wondering how. How does a nation organize itself to deliver such a casual luxury, such a symbol of overwhelming power, all the way to a muddy hole in the middle of a war zone? How is this little box even possible? While the German soldier was foraging, the American GI was opening a box. This wasn't just about food. It was a revolution in military logistics, a system designed to weaponize comfort and project American industrial power right onto the front lines. The story starts even before Pearl Harbor. The U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps was already deep into subsistence research, asking a fundamental question. How do you deliver a reliable, calorie-dense meal to a soldier under fire, anywhere in the world? The first, and perhaps most legendary, answer was the D-ration. In 1937, the Army approached Hershey with a strange request. Create a 4-ounce chocolate bar that could survive extreme temperatures, provide a quick energy boost, and crucially, taste a little better than a boiled potato. The Army didn't want soldiers snacking on it. They wanted an emergency survival food. The result was a dense, bittersweet block of chocolate, oat flour, and vitamins, a caloric bomb designed to keep a man going when nothing else was available. But for daily sustenance, something more was needed. Enter Dr. Ancel Keys, yes, the same man who would later study the Mediterranean diet. In 1941, he developed the K-ration at his University of Minnesota lab. This was the pinnacle of mobile combat nutrition. It was a complete three-meal system packed into small, color-coded wax cardboard boxes, brown for breakfast, green for dinner, blue for supper. Inside, a soldier would find a mix of canned meats like chopped ham and egg, biscuits, a fruit bar, instant coffee, or a bouillon packet, sugar, and even a few cigarettes. It was a self-contained, pocket-sized promise of predictability in the chaos of war. For troops in more static positions, there was the heavier C-ration. This was the workhorse. It consisted of 2 cans, the M unit, with a meat-based stew like meat and vegetable hash, and the B unit, containing biscuits, sugar, and coffee. These cans were famously durable and came with the iconic P-38 can opener, a tiny piece of punched steel that GIs wore on their dog tag chains and called the John Wayne. The scale of this operation was staggering. On the home front, factory floors at Hershey, Hormel, Libby, and Del Monte were transformed into engines of war. America's vast agricultural abundance was being processed, canned, dehydrated, and packed into standardized, waterproof meals by the hundreds of millions. They'd packed insoluble coffee, chewing gum, matches, even toilet paper. These weren't just calories. They were morale items. U.S. doctrine explicitly recognized that sugar, coffee, and tobacco were not peacetime luxuries, but essential parts of a soldier's combat load. Contrast this with the German Wehrmacht. On paper, their daily ration looked substantial. But reality at the front was a different story. Their logistics were heavily reliant on horse-drawn carts and vulnerable rail lines, which were prime targets for partisans and Allied air power. As the war dragged on, ersatz, or substitute foods, became common acorn coffee, bread stretched with sawdust. A German soldier's hot meal depended on the Feldkoch, the mobile field kitchen, arriving with its thin stews, a sight that became increasingly rare on the crumbling Eastern Front. The system was brittle, planned for a short war, and it fractured under pressure. The American system, however, was built for endurance. It was a logistical marvel that encased sweetness, salt, fat, and the simple ritual of a coffee break into a parcel you could carry in your pocket. It promised that no matter how far you were from home, a piece of that home predictable, reliable, and abundant was with you. And as American forces landed in North Africa, pushed through Italy, and stormed the beaches of Normandy, German soldiers began to encounter this abundance firsthand. Captured G's had pockets full of chocolate and cigarettes. Discarded rations.
Video begins showing archival footage of German soldiers in Tunisia. Dusty and weary, the dust of Kasserine Pass still choked the air. We pushed forward, expecting another hard fight, but instead we found silence and a ghost town of American supplies. The enemy had pulled back so fast they left everything. We walked through stacks of crates higher than a man's head. Inside, it was like another world. Tins of peaches in sweet syrup, something I hadn't seen since I was a boy. Cans of this strange pink meat they called spam. Coffee, real coffee, not the roasted acorn swill we'd been drinking for months. And cigarettes, cartons upon cartons of them. We just stood there for a moment, stunned. A corporal next to me, a kid from Bavaria, just laughed. He couldn't believe it. Cut to footage of the Sicilian or Italian campaign showing a similar scene of abandoned supplies. Then came Sicily, same story. We'd fight them tooth and nail for a ridge, and when they finally fell back, we'd find their leftovers, crates of rations dropped by parachute. I found a diary entry from a grenadier not much older than my own brother. He wrote, "Today we captured an American position. I found a small box." Inside were slices of pineapple. Pineapple, in the middle of this hell, I ate one and saved the rest. It tastes like sunshine. Sunshine, that's what he called it. Our officers grew nervous. They saw how it affected us. Lieutenant Vogel warned us, leave it. It could be poisoned, trapped. But we knew better. No one poisons an army with chocolate bars and chewing gum. The temptation was too great. How could you resist when all you had was hardtack that could break your teeth and a thin slice of tinned mystery meat? Transition to Normandy footage. Hedgerows missed tense soldiers. Normandy was different. The fighting was thicker, more claustrophobic. We were trapped in those hedgerows for days, sometimes only 100 meters from the Americans. In the quiet of the early morning, before the shooting started, a strange thing would happen. A smell would drift across the mist. The smell of frying bacon, of fresh coffee brewing. It drove us mad. It was a psychological weapon more effective than any propaganda leaflet. They weren't just surviving over there. They were living. We were ghosts, subsisting on ersatz bread and watery soup, while they were having breakfast. One of our sergeants, a veteran of the Eastern Front, shook his head and muttered, "How can you defeat an army that brings its kitchens to the front line?" I remember a young soldier, no older than 17, who found a partially eaten American fruit bar after a skirmish. He wrapped it carefully in a piece of cloth. "For my sister," he said, not looking at me. "If I make it home, he wouldn't." We found him 2 days later, the small cloth-wrapped package still clutched in his pocket. These weren't just luxuries, they were symbols. They were proof of a machine, an industrial power so vast it could deliver comfort right into the heart of chaos. We saw them bartering. A patrol that had overrun a jeep would trade packs of American.
The surrender was a blur of hands in the air, a sea of gray uniforms moving as one exhausted tide. We hadn't eaten properly in weeks, not since the Ardennes offensive collapsed into a frantic, freezing retreat. Hunger was a dull, constant ache in the belly, a background noise to the fear. Then a sudden, jarring shift. One day we were huddled in a ditch, sharing a stale crust. The next, we were shuffling in a line, not towards a delousing station, but towards a smell that made my stomach clench with a forgotten kind of anticipation. An American soldier, barely a man himself, slapped a ladle of something white and steaming onto my metal tray. Scrambled eggs! Next to it, 2 sausages, a slice of thick white bread with a pat of real butter melting into it, and a small carton of milk. I stared at it. It was more than I'd seen in a week on the front. I looked up down the line of my comrades. The same look of stunned disbelief was on every face. We sat on wooden benches, the silence broken only by the scrape of forks and spoons. The coffee was real, not the roasted acorn substitute we'd been drinking for years. It was hot, bitter, and wonderful. We were shipped out, across the ocean on crowded but clean vessels. The journey was a strange limbo. We were prisoners, yet we were fed 3 times a day. We arrived not in a barren wasteland, but in America itself, places with names like Texas, Minnesota, Alabama. The camps were rows of simple wooden barracks, surrounded by wire, but inside that wire was a world that defied everything we had been told. The Geneva Convention, they said. But this felt like something more. It felt like a display. The mess hall became the center of our universe. We learned the rhythms of the American larder. We had meat, not just on Sundays, but several times a week. We had potatoes, vegetables, and jam for our bread. Thanksgiving came, a holiday we didn't understand, but we understood the meal. Roasted turkey. Stuffing, a sweet potato mash with marshmallows on top. Marshmallows. I saw men weep openly at the sight. We were gaining weight. Our hollow cheeks filled out. The persistent coughs from malnutrition began to fade. We worked on local farms, picking cotton or harvesting sugar beets, and we were paid in scrip for the camp canteen. Shelves were stocked with things we'd only dreamed of. Chocolate bars, soap that lathered, packs of cigarettes, tins of fruit. A strange sort of shame began to fester. We wrote letters home trying to describe our situation without causing more pain. "I am well," we'd write. "The food is sufficient. How could you tell your wife, who was surviving on turnip rations in bombed-out Berlin, that you had eaten peaches and cream for dessert?" It felt like a betrayal. The barracks became debating societies at night. "It's a trick," one man would argue. "They fatten us up to make us weak, to break our spirit." But another would counter, his voice low. "If this is what they give their prisoners, what do their own soldiers eat?" The thought was terrifying. We saw it in small ways, the casual nature of their abundance. We saw trucks delivering crates of Coca-Cola to the guard towers. We heard stories of mobile bakeries that could produce thousands of fresh loaves an hour right behind the front lines. One of the guards, a sailor before the army, told us about the ice cream machines on their warships. Ice cream. In the middle of the ocean, in the middle of a war, it wasn't just food. It was a weapon, a psychological one. It spoke of a capacity, an industrial might that we couldn't comprehend. One evening, I sat on my bunk with a letter to my brother, who I prayed was still alive somewhere on the Eastern Front. A half-eaten tin of peaches sat next to me, the syrupy juice gleaming in the lamplight. I had my spoon halfway to my mouth when I stopped. I looked at the sweet, glistening fruit, a luxury beyond imagining a few months ago, and I understood. This wasn't about kindness. This wasn't about the Geneva Convention. This was a message. Every meal, every chocolate bar, every slice of soft, fresh bread was a testament to a power we had fatally underestimated. This abundance wasn't a sideshow to the war. It was the engine of the war. These weren't just rations. They were proof. Proof that we had already lost. The war was over. The silence was louder than any explosion. I stood there, not in some grand parade, but back in what was left of my hometown. The streets were ghosts, the buildings skeletons, and in my hand I held this AP38 can opener, a tiny piece of stamped metal. For years, things like this felt like a mockery, a symbol of everything we lacked. Now, holding it, it felt like a lesson. I remember the rumors, the stories that trickled back from the front. American prisoners captured with pockets full of Hershey's chocolate bars, chewing gum, even little packets of coffee. We'd laugh it off. Luxuries, we called them. They fight with candy, but as the years dragged on, our own rations thinned to watery soup and bread that was more sawdust than flour. The enemy's luxury started to look a lot like discipline, like a plan. You see, America didn't just send soldiers. It sent an entire industrial behemoth, packaged and delivered to the front lines. They had these things called K-rations. They were never designed for long-term use, but they produced millions of them. Each one was a complete meal with crackers, a meat product, a drink powder, and a sweet. While our commanders were scrambling for grain and potatoes, the Americans were debating the caloric content of a biscuit. Think about that. Hershey was churning out over 1 billion of their field ration D bars, a special chocolate designed not to melt. Coca-Cola, in a move of marketing genius, promised that any soldier could get a Coke for 5 cents anywhere in the world, and they delivered. They'd built 64 bottling plants overseas during the war, following the front lines like a logistics tale. It wasn't just a drink. It was a taste of home, a symbol of a system that could deliver comfort on a continental scale. Meanwhile, Germany was slowly starving. The Allied blockade choked our imports. The relentless bombing campaigns pulverized our factories and railways. We had ersatz coffee made from acorns and butter stretched with. Well, it's better not to think about it. We were a formidable fighting force, yes. But an army, as they say, marches on its stomach. And our stomachs were empty. The truth, the one we admitted only in whispers, was that we weren't just fighting men. We were fighting factories. We were fighting a logistical network so vast, so efficient, it could deliver morale in a can. Every K-ration, every candy bar, was a message. It said, there's more where that came from. We can do this forever. That realization, more than any single battle, is what broke our spirit. The enemy's luxury wasn't decadence. It was industrial might made edible. I'll never forget the first time I had real American coffee. It was December. The rain was freezing as it hit the ground. A young GI, barely old enough to shave, handed me a steaming metal cup. It was hot, sweet, and strong. In that moment, surrounded by ruin, that simple cup of coffee told me everything I needed to know about who had won the war and why. It was the taste of power. A few weeks later, in a POW camp, a guard slid a can of peaches under the wire. I shared it with the man next to me, a fellow who had fought at Stalingrad. We didn't speak, we just ate.